On a Thursday, I moved into the apartment. It wasn't much: uneven floorboards, peeling paint on the walls, and a kitchen that didn't look like it had been updated since the 1970s. But it was inexpensive, and I needed inexpensive. With hardly a word, the landlord nodded and gave me the keys. He gave the impression that he didn't want to stay and was ready to get rid of me. The smell caught my attention right away. It was present but not overbearing. It smelled musty and damp, like weather-beaten wood. I dismissed it. Sometimes the fragrance of old buildings is like that. With the exception of a few pieces of shabby furniture that appeared to have been purchased at a thrift store, the flat was largely vacant. There was a mirror in the corridor. It had a solid gold frame with elaborate carvings around the edges, and it was tall, perhaps 6 feet. The window was foggy and covered in fingerprints and dust. The reflection made me uncomfortable, but I wasn't sure why. It seemed as though it had no place there. I was just being paranoid, I assured myself. It is hard to move, and this was my first time doing it alone. At first, it was inevitable that everything would seem weird. The flat was unnaturally silent the first night. The sort of silence that gives you the impression that someone is watching you. I had trouble falling asleep. My flesh crawled with every floorboard squeak. I made the decision to clean the following morning. I started by tackling the mirror. I got some glass cleaner and an old rag and began to scrub. I noticed my mirror looking back at me as I cleaned the dirt away. There was something off about it. It didn't look like me, and I'm not sure how to describe that. Not precisely. The eyes felt different, but the motions were the same. I waved my hand, and the reflection waved back. As if they were too concentrated, too conscious. After shaking it off, I completed cleaning. The mirror appeared to be just another mirror by the time it was completely clean. Just a glass fragment in an ornate frame. I couldn't quit thinking about it that night. I told myself that I was just startled by being in a strange environment and that I was just seeing things. I could feel it, though, when I climbed into bed and turned out the lights, the mirror. It seemed to be observing me. I kept waking up. Whenever I did, I couldn't help but stare at the entryway where the mirror was hidden. I would have to tell myself to breathe because my heart would be racing. I assumed it was just a mirror. Wood and glass. Not much more. I became aware of things on the third night. Minor details. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of movement. Nothing in the room matched the shadow. It was the light, the way it reflected off the glass, I told myself. However, I saw something late that night that I couldn't explain. I was trying to relax in bed by looking at the ceiling. I froze as I looked toward the corridor. It was not me who was reflected. It stood looking into the bedroom through the mirror. The look wasn't mine, but the face was. It was incorrect and twisted. The eyes were unblinking and broad. There was a little, false smile curled around the mouth. It vanished as soon as I blinked. I clung to the blanket as if it could shield me, keeping my back against the headboard till morning. Something tells me that the mirror doesn't need to move, even though it hasn't. It's waiting, whatever's within. Observing. Additionally, I'm not sure how long I can ignore it. I didn't get any sleep that evening. My heart raced with every grumble and creak of the old dwelling. I kept my eyes on the corridor, hoping to catch another glimpse of that contorted face. I was not comforted by the fact that it did not appear. I finally got up as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds. As I walked to the hallway, my legs felt unsteady. The mirror was just where it had been, towering and motionless, its surface glistening in the morning light. I just stood there looking at it for a while. Now it was just me, pale and exhausted, with heavy circles under my eyes, and the reflection was normal. Though I secretly knew it wasn't, I wanted to think what I'd witnessed was a dream. I went to the closet, took out a sheet, and tossed it over the mirror. The entire elaborate frame was covered by the fabric that caught on its edges. I took a step back with a slight sense of relief. Perhaps it couldn't see me if I couldn't see it. That was short-lived. I was unable to concentrate on anything for the remainder of the day. I attempted to unpack further boxes, but I sensed that each time I passed the hallway. Despite being concealed beneath the duvet, the mirror remained. It seemed as though the air surrounding it was thicker, but I was unable to describe it. I was nervous by the time nightfall arrived. I didn't turn off any of the lights. I continued to look toward the hallway even then. The sound began at midnight or so. At first, it was dim. A faint tapping sound, akin to a gentle tap on glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze. It was coming from the mirror in the hallway. Press. 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 I remained motionless. I held my breath. The tapping increased in volume and intensity. It had a rhythm, as if someone was attempting to catch my attention, so it wasn't random. I switched on the flashlight and reached for my phone. I slipped into the hallway, my hands shaking. As soon as I moved closer, the tapping ceased. The sheet that had been draped over the mirror remained. Though I knew better, nothing had changed. I wanted to leave. Must return to my room, secure the door, and act as if nothing were occurring. But I had to stay for some reason. Almost by itself, my hand extended and I drew the sheet down. The glass was flawless and the mirror was immaculate. It wasn't right that my reflection was staring back at me. Although it appeared normal, the eyes felt excessively active and acute. I wanted to move away, but I was unable to do so. Despite the fact that I stood stationary, my reflection leaned forward. "Why do you feel afraid?" it muttered. It wasn't my voice. It seemed to emanate from deep within the mirror and was frigid and far away. I nearly tripped over my own feet as I staggered back. This time, the reflection remained in the glass, grinning dimly, rather than following me. "Pay attention to me," it stated. The reflection started to blur as the hallway lights flickered. I briefly believed I saw someone else in the glass, a dark figure with sunken eyes that was taller than me. Then it vanished. After sprinting back to my room, I slammed the door. I placed my back against the door, my hands quivering, my breathing shallow. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I made the decision that I couldn't stay here by dawn. I just needed to leave, regardless of violating the lease or forfeiting the deposit. However, the front door refused to move when I attempted to leave. The handle moved and the lock turned readily, but the door seemed to be held shut by something. I threw my weight into it and pulled harder, but it made little effect. I heard the tapping again behind me. Press. 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 My gut twisted into knots as I slowly turned. My reflection was once again visible in the hallway's exposed mirror. It had stopped grinning. It had an angry expression. "You are not allowed to go," it said. This time, the voice wasn't a whisper. The apartment was filled with the sound of it. I pushed against the entrance door and retreated. Despite the fact that I had not moved, my reflection approached. It declared, "I now own you." The apartment felt colder as the lights flickered once more. How long I stood there looking into the mirror is beyond me. However, the reflection vanished when the lights were eventually turned back on. There was nothing in the mirror. When I tried the door again, it opened. I just ran without thinking. Down the stairs, out of the flat, and into the street. I haven't returned. However, I occasionally sense it when I go by the building. There's still the mirror waiting. And occasionally, I believe it is observing me. After that, I was at a loss for what to do. Even though I had left the flat, I didn't feel as though I had made it out. It was peaceful the first few evenings at my friend Taylor's house. I reassured myself that everything would be all right when I slept on the couch while the TV was playing in the background. However, it wasn't good. I had just mentioned to Taylor that I needed a place to rest and that the apartment made me uneasy. I liked that she didn't ask any questions. However, I couldn't continue to act as though nothing was amiss. 3 nights later, the first sign appeared. At 3 a.m., I woke up in a cold sweat. A late-night ad was still playing on the TV, but it was muted. With my heart pounding, I looked around the room before spotting it. My own reflection. I could see my reflection in the glass of the wide window behind Taylor's couch in the dim light from the streetlights outside. It wasn't just mine, though. There was something else, right behind me. Staring at me through the glass were the identical empty eyes of the dark figure I had seen in the mirror. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. I glanced at the empty room, breathing in short, shallow gasps. The figure was gone when I looked back out the window. I spent the remainder of the night awake. Taylor saw the bags under my eyes the following morning. When she handed me a cup of coffee, she remarked, "You look like hell. Are you sure you're all right?" I wanted to share everything with her, but how would I begin? "Yes," I muttered. I simply couldn't sleep. She looked at me, but she didn't press the issue. I made an effort to be busy that day. I took a stroll, looked through apartment listings, and even assisted Taylor with some errands. However, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was being watched no matter what I did. My nerves were shot by the time the sun went down. I went to bed early and told Taylor that I wasn't feeling well, believing that if I just closed my eyes and waited, sleep would come. It didn't. I heard it again at midnight. Press. 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 My eyes snapped open as I froze. This time the noise was coming from the window. I slowly sat up, my heart thumping painfully. The tapping persisted, steady and purposeful, even after the curtains were drawn. I was unwilling to look. I didn't wish to find out. Nevertheless, something drew me to the window. With a shaking hand, I extended my hand and drew aside the curtain. Nothing was there. Only the pale illumination of a street lamp and the deserted street below. I looked away, letting out a trembling breath, but then I heard it. My name was whispered by a familiar, quiet voice. It was there when I whirled back to the window. My own reflection. However, it was incorrect. The room behind me was not visible through the glass. Rather, it displayed my former apartment's hallway. The mirror. My reflection was grinning once more. "You are unable to run," it said. I got shivers from the voice. It was resonating in my mind like a bad memory rather than coming from the window. I tripped over the side of the couch and staggered back. This time, I wasn't followed by my reflection. It remained in the window, smiling, staring into my vacant eyes. "Go away from me," with a cracked voice, I yelled. With a confused and worried expression on her face, Taylor hurried into the room. "What's happening?" she inquired. I gestured toward the window, but when she looked back, it was once more just a window. The corridor and the mirror were gone, and my reflection was normal. I stumbled. I thought I saw something. Taylor crossed her arms and scowled. "You're frightening me. Are you certain that everything is all right?" How could I tell her the truth, even though I wanted to? She would believe I was going crazy. Perhaps I was. "Yes," I said under false pretenses. "Just a nightmare." Despite her lack of conviction, she nodded. "All right. But I'm available if you need to talk, okay?" I forced a faint smile and nodded. I fell onto the couch with my head in my hands as soon as she left the room. I couldn't continue to live this way. The mirror was following me, not just in that apartment. And I didn't know how to stop it. I realized the following day that I could no longer ignore it. I needed answers, regardless of what was going on. Taylor and I didn't talk much that morning. She gave me the look individuals give when they're unsure of your well-being but don't know how to inquire because she was already tense from the previous evening. After telling her that I had errands to run, I walked away. I went to the library first. Although it seemed archaic, I hadn't found much when I Googled haunted mirror and weird reflections. I could at least do further research at the library and perhaps even discover some local anecdotes about the building or apartment. The librarian had gentle eyes and was a petite, elderly woman. I was grateful that she didn't inquire as to why I required information on strange occurrences in apartments or haunted objects. She just directed me to a section of books and articles about local history. I flipped through faded photos and yellowed pages for hours. One item drew my attention, but the majority of it was dull: city planning, abandoned businesses, and tales of long-dead residents. It concerned a man named Richard Ames and was from the 1970s. He had resided in the same apartment with the mirror that I formerly occupied. "Mysterious disappearance leaves more questions than answers" was the headline. The narrative described how Richard Ames had disappeared into thin air. Late at night, neighbors claimed to have heard odd sounds emanating from his apartment, including tapping on the walls, whispers, and laughter. A week later, the landlord discovered the apartment deserted, save for a huge gold-framed mirror that had been left in the hallway. The mirror followed the description completely. My pulse was pounding as I reclined in my chair. Although the report provided no explanation for Richard's disappearance or what happened to him, it felt like confirmation. It wasn't simply my imagination. There was a backstory to the mirror. What did it want with me, though? After copying the article's information, I left for home. To Taylor's house, that is. It no longer felt like mine. She had her arms crossed and was waiting for me when I arrived. She remarked, "You've been gone all day. Are you all right?" I paused. After dismissing her for days, I was at my breaking point. I added, my voice a little lower than I would have liked, "I need to tell you something." Taylor scowled and motioned for me to take a seat. "All right, let's spill." I told her everything, then. The voice, the tapping, the mirror, and the reflection. I didn't omit anything. Taylor just stared at me with her mouth hanging open after I was done. "Are you serious?" At last, she uttered those words. I gave a nod. She rubbed her temples and moaned. "All right. This is a lot. However, why don't we simply return to the flat and remove this mirror if you believe it to be haunted, cursed, or something?" I was surprised at what she suggested. I felt sick to my stomach at the idea of returning, but she was right. Destroying the mirror could be the only way to put a stop to this if it was the cause of everything. I said, "I'm not sure if that will work, but I'll give it a shot." Before I could decide otherwise, Taylor snatched up her car keys. "Then let's get started. The sooner, the better." It was an anxious drive to the apartment. My chest tightened at the sight of the structure, which I hadn't seen since I left. It was still silent and dilapidated, but I knew better now. I used the spare key. I still had to unlock the door after we ascended the stairs. The musty scent hit me instantly, and the air within was stagnant. The gold frame of the mirror caught the dim light from the window, and it was in the hallway just where I had left it. Taylor approached it and examined it as if it were a piece of furniture. "Is this it?" she inquired. I took a couple steps back and nodded. She gave the glass a tap. "I don't think it looks that scary." The reflection changed before I could reply. Taylor's hand remained on the glass as she froze. Even though she wasn't moving, her reflection turned to face her. She took a step back and murmured, "What the hell?" She was not imitated by the reflection. Rather, it grinned, a big, strange smile that didn't belong on her face. "Taylor, leave it alone," I shouted. However, it was too late. My teeth began to ache as the mirror began to hum, a deep, vibrating sound. The room seemed to be sinking in on itself, and the air around us felt thick. "Can you see that?" Taylor yelled as he retreated. I witnessed it. The reflection extended out as the mirror's surface rippled like waves. From within, a hand, Taylor's hand, but not Taylor's, pressed against the glass, its fingers curving as though they were trying to pierce it. "Go!" I grabbed her arm and pulled her in the direction of the door while I yelled. The distorted reflection of Taylor watched us with that same twisted grin while the hum of the mirror became louder, nearly deafening. It wasn't until we were outside, struggling to breathe, that we stopped running. "What on earth was that?" Taylor's face went white as she gasped. "I'm not sure," I responded, trembling. However, I believe it desires more than a simple reflection. We didn't say anything for a while. Our heads were racing, so we just sat on the curb outside the building to regain our breath. It was Taylor who broke the stillness first. "Now what do we do?" she inquired. Even though her voice was tremulous, it had a biting edge and demanded answers that I didn't have. "I'm not sure," I said. "However, we can't stop there. It's risky. You saw it, after all. It's more than just a spooky trick. It's alive," she concluded for me, or nearly so. The weight of what we had witnessed pressed down on us as we sat there for a little while longer. It wasn't just a haunting mirror. It displayed more than just odd reflections. I was unable to describe it. It was something else. "We ought to demolish it," Taylor declared at last. Her final and weighty words lingered in the air. It seemed sensible to destroy it, but the idea of returning there and confronting that monstrosity once more made my stomach turn. "What happens if it fails?" I inquired. "What if it becomes worse when you break it?" Taylor looked at me sternly. "Worse than it is now?" It attempted to draw me in. I refused to let it languish and wait for someone else to discover it. She was correct. I couldn't leave that mirror for someone else to find, no matter how much I wanted to flee and never think about it again. "All right," I replied. "However, we must approach it strategically. We must ensure that it is permanently destroyed if we are going to do so." Taylor's jaw was fixed as she nodded. "We should do it this evening, before we become nervous." As we worked out our plan, the hours passed slowly. To smash the mirror apart, we would bring hammers, a crowbar, and anything else we could find. The parts would be bagged and taken far from the apartment, possibly to the river or a remote location where no one would ever discover them. As I sat at her kitchen table, looking at the article I had discovered about Richard Ames, Taylor went to her dad's garage to get materials. I kept thinking about him all the time. Had he attempted to ruin the mirror? Had he been stopped? I ignored the thought as Taylor came back with her arms full of tools. We had no time to second-guess ourselves. She thumped a sledgehammer to the ground and said, "Are you ready?" "Not really," I replied truthfully. "But let's get it done." Just before midnight, we took a car back to the flat. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows like hollow eyes, and the streets were deserted. The silence was stifling, and the air inside was colder than before. With the tools clanking in Taylor's backpack, my heart was racing as we headed to the hallway. As previously, the mirror was there to greet us. Even though its surface was smooth and still, I could sense it observing us. As he took the sledgehammer out of the bag, Taylor whispered, "Let's get this over with." We both hesitated as we stood in front of the mirror after she gave me a crowbar. "Do you sense that?" My question was hardly audible above a whisper. Taylor gave a nod. "Indeed." As if it were living. I gripped the crowbar tighter. "3?" She gave another nod. 1, 2. The mirror began to waver before I could utter 3. Our reflections appeared, not as they should have, but incorrectly, as the smooth surface moved. Twisted. The black, empty eyes of Taylor's reflection were accompanied by an overly broad smile that seemed to be held together by unseen threads. My own was terrible. It didn't have a smile. With its head cocked and an expression filled with something I couldn't identify, it was looking directly at me. Fear. Hunger. Hatred. Take action. I yelled. Taylor used all of her strength to swing the sledgehammer. The hit sounded like a gunshot, and a jagged line split down the middle of the mirror as it cracked. The reflections remained intact. They shifted. The crack grew as Taylor swung again, but the mirror was now humming, the same low, vibrating sound as before. The air seemed heavy and dense, and the room seemed to be whirling. Go on. With a shout, I lifted the crowbar and slammed it against the window. Like a real creature in agony, the mirror let forth a moan. More fissures appeared on its surface, but the reflections remained, shifting, pressing against the glass as though they were trying to penetrate. Why doesn't it break? Taylor slapped it repeatedly while screaming. I didn't respond. I was unable to. The glass fissures were glowing, a sickening, unnatural light leaking out, and the humming was now deafening. The mirror then let out a shriek. It was a high-pitched, inhuman, angry, and hopeless sound that I will never forget. The air around us seemed to burst as the light from the cracks erupted, blinding us. I was flung back and struck the wall with force. The mirror breaking, the fragments shooting in all directions like shards of light, was the last thing I saw before everything turned black. Then there was quiet. There was silence when I woke up. Too silent. I had trouble sitting up since my head was throbbing. Only the faint light of a street lamp outside illuminated the dim passageway. The instruments Taylor and I had brought were strewn about, and broken glass fragments shone on the floor like small stars. Taylor? My voice was raspy, hardly audible above a whisper. I glanced around, and when I didn't see her, my heart began to race. Then a moan reached my ears. Taylor! With my hands crunching over glass fragments, I scurried toward the direction of the sound. A few steps away, she clutched her arm and sagged against the wall. Hey, how are you? I grabbed her shoulders and asked. Her eyes were hazy as she blinked at me. What happened? What happened? The mirror, I addressed it. It broke. She drew a trembling breath and turned her eyes to the stack of shattered glass. Is it gone? I'm not sure, I said. I tried to remain calm, but my voice trembled. Both of us turned to face the location where the mirror had been suspended. The glass had vanished, reduced to a million small fragments strewn all over the floor, but the golden frame remained. However, something didn't feel right. As if before a thunderstorm, the air was heavy. Additionally, there was a slight sound that was so quiet I nearly missed it. A murmur. I said, "Do you hear that?" Taylor's face turned white. Indeed. It originates from. Both of us looked at the biggest piece of glass that was on the ground. Now the whispering was louder, rising and falling in a language I couldn't comprehend like a chant. Taylor's voice was strained as she replied, "I think we need to leave." My legs felt like lead, yet I nodded. I couldn't look away from the shard. Something was there, movement, things writhing and twisting just below the surface. Taylor tugged at my arm, saying, "Come on." I was startled out of it by that. We staggered out of the hallway as I stood and held her hand. As we dashed down the steps and into the chilly night air, my heart was pounding. Not until we were a block away did we stop. We didn't look back at the building till after that. There was a faint illumination coming from the second-floor window nearest the location of the mirror. Taylor shuddered. "Now what do we do?" I had nothing to say. The only way to solve the problem had seemed to be to destroy the mirror, but none of our actions had resolved the issue. It felt worse, if anything. Finally, I said, "We need help. Someone with knowledge of this type of thing. As an exorcist, perhaps?" With a tone full of doubt, Taylor questioned. "Perhaps," I replied. "I'm not sure. However, we cannot simply leave things this way." With a sigh, Taylor massaged her face. "All right. Not tonight, though. I am unable to, I just can't." I gave a nod. I didn't hold her accountable. My head was a complete mess, and my entire body hurt. After returning to her car, we sat quietly for a while, attempting to comprehend what had transpired. However, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that we weren't alone as we sat there. I spent the night at Taylor's house. Neither of us got any sleep. With the lights on, we sat in her living room, giggling at every shadow and creak. My phone buzzed at 3 in the morning. The notification that appeared on the screen said, "Missed call, unknown." A beat skipped in my chest. "Who is it?" With a cautious tone, Taylor inquired. I didn't respond. As I checked my voicemail and opened the phone, my hands were shaking. A fresh message appeared. I took a big breath and hit play. Initially, there was just static. Then I heard it, faintly. My own words. "Avoid looking behind you." A shiver went down my back. Taylor's eyes must have widened when she saw my expression. She questioned, "What is it?" I didn't respond. I was unable to. Since I sensed it. I had something behind me. I didn't look back. Nor do I believe I ever will.